We'll discuss a topic that makes an awful lot of people nervous simply because they don't understand it. And that's the general topic of evil. More specifically, the topic of evil that inhabits human beings. And I want you to remember from the very start that human beings have no good or evil in themselves at all. We can either be possessed by badness, by weakness, by self-pity, and all these other wrong states, or we can be divinely possessed. Now, looking around the world, what do you think is the proportion of each? Looking at the world, you see for a certainty, and looking at your own lives, you see for sure that there is something wrong with human beings, and what is wrong is that we have been and are taken over by something that is alien to what we could be. So remember at the start that as evil as any of us might have been in the past, how we might have hurt other people and hurt ourselves also. That evil does not essentially belong to you. It may be a part of you presently in your present state of lack of inner development. Now, remembering that, you must also remember that finally, eventually, after a long time of investigation, you will finally see also, and must see absolutely, that you are not your own goodness either. There's no goodness anywhere except that of truth itself. But we're going to talk about what we commonly call human badness, malice, and I will use the term dark forces quite a bit because it's a good general description of what we're going to talk about. So you will agree, I'm sure, by your witnessing of what goes on in the world, that dark forces do indeed inhabit human beings and cause them to act as they do. Marching down the street, shaking their fists and shaking their rifles. A family in a home sniping at each other. All 4 or 5 of the people in that home in heartache and sorrow and pressure, which causes them to lash out at everyone else in that home. I'm talking about the world the way it is. So we can say that a dark force, evil, is anything that prevents you, that prevents any of us from becoming a new kind of man or woman inwardly. Now, you don't have to think about that because you can't think about it. You can't think about what it means to be new. You can experience it when your thinking about it comes to an end. Because thinking only recreates the old nature as thought, wrongly used, connects with a false sense of identity. You can think about who you are not, but you can't think about who you are in reality, essentially. When you rise above all thoughts about who you are, about your identity, then there is an utterly different kind of identity which doesn't have to be held in place at all by thought, by action, by feeling, by anything at all. Because truth stays in place all by itself. It needs no assistance from you or from me. It's complete. It's the whole thing. Now, I want to go into a little bit of the devices, the tricks that these dark, unconscious forces use in order to keep us where we are. I want you to know there is an enemy. In itself, it is utterly powerless. There is no dark force for an awakened man, an awakened woman. There's no dark force as far as enmity is concerned to a person who has escaped his own dark forces. It doesn't exist. So remember that also, that there's no enemy at all when you're wide awake, when you understand what it means to be wide awake. But just now, because you don't understand, because you lack development, you yourself, in your ignorance of life and why you're here, you unconsciously create what is then termed an enemy, a hostile force, which is anyone or anything that stands in the way of what you want. That's it, boiling it down. You want certain things, certain ego benefits. You want people to admire you. You want people to give you a sense of security, or you want something for an organization. Anything that doesn't give you what you think you must have is considered an enemy. So that, in brief, is how we unconsciously, because we don't understand life, how we create opposition. And when you finally you want nothing but truth itself, then the opposition collapses, because we don't unknowingly cause them inside of ourselves. One way in which these dark forces, hostile spirits, keep us where we are in our pain, in a very low basement of life. Listen to this, please, now. It's very important. And notice, perhaps, as I say it, how something in you rebels against it and doesn't want it to be so. One way in which evil forces keep us under their power is by promising us a future. Now, we're social creatures. We live in this world of society. And of course, you must plan for your future. You might want to buy insurance for your house or car or whatever. You make certain plans to keep a supply of food in the home. On that level, of course, there's nothing wrong with planning for the future. Maybe you're going to move somewhere because it's good or necessary to do so. So you make future plans. I'm not talking about that. Now see what I am talking about. Dark forces promise you a better psychological, spiritual future. And when you fall for it, when you accept it as being valid, you have fallen into the trap unknowingly, and now you're in trouble with yourself and with everyone else you meet. Because now, having the enemy within, you'll project it outward and create other enemies out there. Here is what happens. You are unhappy in the present. And the dark force says, reject the present, even hate it. Even hate your present life, and escape into the future. Tomorrow will be better. Haven't you seen political movements, religious movements, all who say, escape the hated, unpleasant now, and look into the future for something better? There is the enemy whispering to you. And we have listened to them long enough. Now here's what we have to do. You have to understand that when they say, abandon the present and go into the future, they are urging you to keep yourself in misery. They are urging you to recreate your false identity from moment to moment so that you're always apart from God, who is in eternity and right now. Because when you're in time, you can't be in right now, can you? You're in one or the other. So the dark spirits urge you to escape from the now. When you understand the trick that is being played on you, you say, I am absolutely not going to have a psychological future at all. Yes, tomorrow and next week I'm going to repair the house. A month after that I'm going to a certain place for a business. We understand that. We're talking about you, so that inwardly you can go to this business conference, or you can take care of this family matter in the future, but there's no prediction as to how it should turn out. There's no prediction because there's no need for it. Right now, because you're with truth, with reality, right now, you have everything that God has to offer. Therefore, there's no point looking toward the future. It's only when we don't know what we can actually have that we have a false aim in the future, go into that, and therefore cut ourselves off from the complete richness of knowing where we are right now and having what we can have right now, which is complete control of our lives. Control of our lives because something other than our intellect is controlling it. See, just as there are dark spirits, there are true spirits. There's the Spirit of God himself. And when we thoroughly go through the investigation of where we went wrong and how we permitted ourselves to be taken over, when the investigation is done, then an invitation comes into truth to come in and show us where we've made the mistake. And when you see the mistake, time begins to be canceled, and you cease to recreate your hopes in the future. You see how foolish they are. You see how they've never done anything for you. And you begin to get pretty daring. You begin to say, all right, I've listened to the voices that told me that 10 years from now, or when I get that man, get that woman, get that change of it, I've listened to that. And every time I got what I wanted, nothing happened inwardly. I just changed an exterior location, changed my attitudes a little bit, but my essential nature is not changed at all. I'm still a worried human being. See? That's one way in which they trick us, which is telling us to abandon the now for the future. See how political, as I said, political organizations and other organizations all tell you the same thing. This is because all the people belonging to it, maybe you belong to it yourself, have abandoned the now in which true knowledge and true insight exists. That's the only place it exists is right now, because thinking does not know. Thoughts, ideas cannot comprehend. But right now, where you have dissolved your false sense of self created by thought, that can know right now. Another way in which these false forces use us is to, listen to this, is to make us fascinated. Have you seen movies on television in which a famous criminal or a famous historical tyrant is glorified? We're fascinated with evil in the world. We are fascinated with badness, with things wrong inside ourselves. This is negative fascination, and it's gripped us, hasn't it? It's got us. I'll get close to home now. Think about your physical self, your physical appearance. If you're overweight, you worry about that, don't you? You're fascinated with it, aren't you? You're fascinated with the fact that you're overweight and you can't break the problem of it. You have hostile thoughts, little secret thoughts you're glad no one sees going through your mind. And they go over and over and over in your mind. You can't get rid of them. They nag you. They haunt you. Fascination, negative fascination, right? You see then that one of the other tricks that the dark forces use is to tell you that this fascination is right life, that it's real excitement. Now you know what to do with yourself when you're driving the highway on a trip. You've got something to think about. You understand that as long as you're in a state of self-condemnation, fascinated with all the mistakes you've made in the past, fascinated by your weakness, fascinated by your self-excuses, as long as you're in this state, you are also in the state of the future that we just talked about. Therefore, you can't do anything right with the present. And the one thing you must do right with the present is to let it be present, without the interference of any kind of ideas, without the interference of any kind of pseudo-excitement in which your mind is just running 1,000 miles an hour. Have you ever caught yourself in the state where you're just walking from your home to the car and your mind is racing like crazy? Have you ever stopped right in the middle of that sidewalk where you're walking and said, "Where am I, for heaven's sake?" I'll tell you where you are. You're in a state of captivity. You're in a state in which, because you don't know that your essence is stronger than evil and error, you're in a state of ignorance in which you have surrendered your life to something that is wrecking it. And if you could stop abruptly, right in the middle of that haunting scene, and catch yourself in the act and say, what am I doing permitting this? Consenting to being taken over by these forces. Now, when this happens to you, and if it happens to you, and it must happen to you, you must get to the point where you can see this. When it happens to you, you must not then make the mistake of going into self-judging, self-condemnation. You can ask the question, you must say, what's the matter with me that I permit a nature like this to take me over? You can illustrate it to yourself. You can say you don't go to the door and a criminal comes up and he says, can I come in and rob your house? You don't say, come in and rob my house. Another criminal comes up and he says, can I come in and stay with you free? Can I have a free live-in your home there? You say, no, you can't do that. But because you don't understand what you're talking, you do exactly that in a home 1,000 million times more valuable than your physical home. Your psychological home, you invite them in because you don't understand their nature. And we are exposing them right now. I want you to understand what's going on right now. This knowledge that you're hearing is exposure of their tricks. So you can see, again, how you're so fascinated, negatively so, with your dreadful life that you like it. You're hypnotized by it. Something has to come from the outside, which is ready to do so when you're ready. Something which is called truth, the force of truth, an angelic force instead of a devilish force. Something has to come from the outside and jolt you so that you can say, what am I doing with myself? You don't do that now. Because you and your negative force are one. I told you the other night that when you are negative, when you are wrong, when you are sour, when you are bitter, that is your whole nature. Now, do you think that bitterness or hatred or violence is going to expose itself to you and tell you what it's doing to you? Quite the opposite. It's going to tell you that it has a right to be there. It is going to tell you that you had better not boot it out. It tells you if you let it go, that you won't be anyone, you won't have anything. See, it's lying to you and trying to make you think that it is existence. The devil will always try to make you think that it is God. God in the sense that it's the only thing you can turn to. Billions of human beings take it for granted that the only resource they have is their own present negative, fascinated nature. They take it for granted, and we are not going to do that anymore. Don't put up with it anymore. This is the right kind of sternness we're talking about. Don't you yield. You catch yourself just about to fall under the spell, and you say no. As best you understand it, as best you can, you shout no. That will give you a shock, and that shock will be felt by the dark force. And then it will, by the way, so you know, it will redouble its efforts, because if it sees that you are slipping away, let me explain it to you. When any kind of a imposition on you, any kind of a demon, any kind of a heaviness senses that you are hearing truth talks like this and beginning to absorb them, they get frightened. They start to shake, and here's why. You'll understand everything I'm talking about eventually if you stick with it. Here's why they shake and why they lie to you so violently and so maliciously. Because they sense that if you put them out, they won't be able to use you for their own very low evil purposes. In other words, if you put them out of your psychic system, which is their present home, they get scared and say, well, what will happen to me? That has nothing to do with you. Don't you listen. Don't you listen to their pathetic pleas, but what will happen to me? Because that is you talking, the only you know now. That's your own self talking. See, you and your evil are one thing. See, the evil is not apart from your present nature. It is it. Just as I said, later on, you are not apart from your whole healthy nature. You are it. Not that you're God or anything like that, but you're the health itself. There's no division. So these forces, when they suspect that you're beginning to understand and apply, they will begin to find ways to preserve their life in you. And you have to be so watchful of how they put on a different costume, a different mask of all kinds to appeal to your false sense of sympathy, for example. Your false sense of sympathy in that you are feeling sorry for them, which is the very same thing as self-sympathy. You understand what I'm talking about? Yeah, how profound and how complex this is? I want you never again to feel sorry for evil. And evil is anything that shakes you, anything that is weak, anything that pleads with you with tears in her eyes. That is badness, and that is trying to trick you into remaining what you've always been, and you had better not listen to it anymore. If you have to go through years and years of guilt, and just guilt alone, in order to break out, then you say, I'm going to go through my guilt 100%. If I'm accused of disloyalty inwardly, if people say, even people who have dark forces in them, they accuse you of being odd, maybe, accusing you of being disloyal because you no longer want to think like the rest of the world thinks, and they try to make you feel guilty, I want you to know that that is not the voice of truth speaking. That's the voice of something else. Because dark forces use other human beings as well as they use you, perhaps, in order to keep you where you are. This is a very individualistic thing. You must make it very individual. You must say, all right, here I am, an individual here on earth. I was born alone, and while I grew up, I met other people, and I have parents and brothers and sisters and family. Later I had a wife or a husband. I have business associates, and while I have material possessions, essentially, I am a single unit in this world. That means it is my responsibility all alone to work on myself, to change myself, to uplift myself, regardless of how that affects any other human being. It is my responsibility to be true to truth alone, not to any other human being, and not even my own elementary, immature nature. The more disloyal you can be to your old nature, the better. And you had better work as fast as you can toward finding out where you have a false loyalty to the old ways, to the old thoughts. Go as fast as you can in dropping them out of your life, so that the sooner the better you begin to feel the Spirit of truth itself beginning to come in and replace the old spirit. Illustrative story. There was a princess who was captured by enemies for political reasons. She was brought to a castle, and she was allowed to roam around the castle as long as she stayed within it. And the only books that they allowed her to read within the castle were books of doom and gloom, fiction novels of darkness, of depression, negative type books of defeat. And there was 15 or 20 of those which they allowed her to have, because her captors, having a bit of knowledge of human psychology, they figured that if they could get her to read these gloom and doom books, it would further her defeat, so that she would be so miserable over being captured that she would agree to signing papers or whatever they wanted her to do in order to gain benefit from her captivity. So they let her read these books, and it worked. And she sat in her cell in the tower reading these deep and dark and dreary novels and nonfiction pieces of defeat and gloom and depression. It affected her. She was very suggestible. Aren't you? Yes. People can suggest something about you. You look sad today. Well, suggestion planned as thought, already you feel sad, right? Because they planned this. I want you to be aware of that. Don't you let people, subtly or otherwise, influence you with words. Be aware of it and shake it off right now. That's because they're gloomy, and I told you they want to keep you where they are. They're afraid of losing you. You had better be very excited over losing them in their dark state. You were put here on earth for your sake, not for theirs. Your sake, the right sake. To grow up, to be healthy, to be a decent human being. Anyway, the princess fell for it. She read all the books, and they watched her carefully, and they could see her tearful eyes, and they could see her weakness, and they could see that presenting her with these books of deep suggestion, negative suggestion, they could see that it was working. They begin to get excited, as all evil people do when they see their evil doing working. So they got to the point, almost to the point, where they were going to get her to sign the papers, whatever it was, so that they would have the political advantage, and they promised then to let her go. They keep, by the way, you are kept in place in the future by promises. Remember promises? Tomorrow will be better, and we fall for that. But this woman, this princess, had one very small right part of her, a good part, because her father, who had been a king, had taught her certain right principles when she was younger, which she forgot like we forget. We forget even the smallest right lessons that came along accidentally to us in this world which is so dark. But she remembered something that her father had told her, but she couldn't remember it very well. And it kept haunting her, and she was trying to remember what it was. And she finally found out what it was. Her father had told her when she was a little girl that if you ever get captured, I want you to remember, daughter, that every castle has a secret underground exit. She remembered that. And she found the exit, went down underneath the castle, out under the wall, and she escaped because she remembered it. She refused to be finally fascinated by what she was told, and she made her escape. Now remember that word fascination, because we have to come to an end in a moment. Remember the word fascination, negative fascination, and shake it off. You'll shake off the weight of the ages and become a new human being. And that will be enough to think about for now.